The Maroons within the President of the United States by Hebert Aptheker. The Journal of Negro History, Volume 24, Number 2, April 1932. The ever-present feature of Alabama Southern life has an existence of camps of runaway Negro slaves, often called Maroons, when they all but established themselves independently on the frontier. They were seriously annoying, for there were many sources of insubordination, and they offer havens for fugitives, serve as bases for marauding expeditions against nearby plantations, and sometimes supply the nucleus of leadership for planned uprisings. Some contemporary writings and few later historians have noticed, in general, in a meager way, the existence of this feature of American slavery. It merits, however, a detailed treatment. It appears that notice of these Maroon communities have taken only when they have accidentally been discovered or when their activities have become so obnoxious or so dangerous to the slave aristocracy that their destruction was felt to be necessary. Evidence of the existence of at least 50 such communities in various places at various times from 1672 to 1864 have been found. The mountain, forest, or swampy regions of South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama, in order of importance, appear to have been favorable hunts of these black Robin Hoods at the time of settled life, and rather than a pugnacious and a migratory one, was aimed at as evidenced by the fact that the numerous of these Maroon built homes, maintained family, raised cattle, and pursued agriculture. But all this was because of the settled life appears to be much have been exceptional. The most notable of such communities was located in a dismal swamp between Virginia and North Carolina. It seemed likely that 2,000 Negro fugitives or descendants of fugitives lived in this area. They carried on a regular, if illegal, trade with white people living on the border of the swamp. Such settlements have been numerous than available in the evidence would indicate, for their occupants rose less in excitement and less resentment than the guerrilla outlaws. The evidence of such Maroons in Virginia in 1672 approached the point of rebellion, so that a law was passed, urging reward and the hunting and killing of these outlaws. An item of November 9, 1691 noticed that the deportation by such slaves Mango from Middlesex County, Virginia, and its unspecified number of followers in Rappaport County. These niggers not only took cattle and hog, but what was more important, they had recently stole 2 guns, a carbine, and other things. In June 1711, the inhabitants of the colony of South Carolina were kept in great fear and terror by the activity of several Negroes who kept out and armed, robbed, and plundered houses and plantations. These men was led by a slave named Sebastian, who finally was tracked down and killed by an Indian hunter. Lieutenant Governor Gooch of Virginia wrote to the Lord of Trades, June 29, 1729, of some runaway Negroes beginning a settlement in the mountains of their reclaiming by their master. He assured the Lords that the militia was being trained to prevent this in the future. In September 1733, the governor of South Carolina offered 20 pounds alive and 10 pounds dead for runaway Negroes who are near Congress and have robbed several inhabitants whereabout. The Nachi Indians offered, April 1744, to aid the government of South Carolina and maintain the subordination of its slave population. 3 months later, July 5, 1774, Governor James Glenn applied for assistance of some Nachi Indians in order to help apprehend runaway Negroes who had sheltered themselves in the woods, being armed and committed disorders. A number of runaway slaves in South Carolina in 1765 was exceedingly large. This led to fears of a general rebellion. At least one camp of Maroon was destroyed that year by a military force. A letter from Charleston, August 16, 1768, told of a battle of a body of Maroons and a number collection of outcasts of mulattoes, muskies, and free Negroes. Governor James Hasselson of Georgia learned in December 1771 that a great number of Negro fugitives had committed robberies and insult between this town and Savannah and Ebenezer, and their numbers, which is now considerable, might have been expected to increase daily. Indian hunters and militiamen were employed to blot out this menace. Yet the same danger was present in Georgia in the summer of 1772. Depredation, piracy, arson was frequent again in the militia assault service. In a letter from Edmund Rudolph to James Madison, August 30th, 1782, disclosed somewhat similar trouble in Virginia. At this time, a notorious robber, a white man, had gathered together a band of 50 Negroes, men and white, black and white, to terrorize the community. The British had combated the revolutionary siege of Savannah with the aid of a numerous body of Negro slaves who served under their inspiration of the promise of freedom. The defeat of the British crushed the hopes for these Negroes. They fled with their arms and called themselves Kings of England, and carried on a guerrilla war for years along the Savannah River. The militia from Georgia and South Carolina, together with Indian allies, successfully attacked a Negro settlement in May 1786, which resulted in heavy casualties. Governor Thomas Pinckney of South Carolina referred in his legislative message in 1787 to the serious deprivation of a group of armed fugitive slaves in the southern part of the state. Chesterfield and Charles City counties, Virginia, were troubled by Maroons in November 1792. At least one white man was killed while tracking them down. 10 of the runaways were finally captured with the aid of dogs. And the neighboring Wilmington, North Carolina, was harassed in June and July 1795 by a number of runaway Negroes who had a daytime secreted themselves in the swamp and woods, and at night had committed various depredations on neighboring plantations. They killed at least one white man, an overseer, and severely wounded another. About 5 of these Maroons, including the leader, known as the General of the Swamps, were killed by a hunting party. It is hoped that these well-timed severities will totally break up the nest of miscreants. At all the events, this town had nothing to apprehend as citizens to keep a strong vigilant night guard. Within 2 weeks of this first report of July 3rd, the capture and execution of 4 more runaways was reported. On July 17th, it was believed that only one leader and on a few deluded followers were still at large. The existence of a Maroon camp in neighboring Elizabeth City, North Carolina, in May 1802 is indicated by the fact that a plot and subordination uncovered among several population at the time was attributed to the agitation of an outlaw Negro Tom Cooper, who had got a camp in these swamps. In March 1811, a runaway community in a swamp of Cambridge County, North Carolina, was wiped out. These Maroons had a chance of bid of defiance to any force whatever, and were resolved to stand their ground. In the attack, 2 Negro women was captured, 2 Negro men killed, and another wounded. The close proximity of the weakly governed Spanish territory, East Florida, had persistently disturbed the identities of the American slaveholders. Many of the settlers in that region, moreover, were Americans, and they were aided by volunteers from the United States, raised the standard in revolt in 1810, the aim being an American annexation. And the correspondent, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Smith and Major Fauntleroy, both United States Army, both actively on the side of the rebels or the patriots in Florida fighting, and the Governor Mitchell of Georgia. There, several frequent references to the fleeing American slaves in Florida, where they helped the Indians in their struggle against the Americans and the Patriots. A few examples may be cited. Smith told General Pinckney, July 30th, 1812, a fresh Indian deprivations in Georgia and escape about 80 slaves. He planned to send troops against them for the safety of our frontier. I can see he requires this course. They have, I am informed, several hundred fugitive slaves from the Carolinas and Georgias at present in their towns. Unless they are checked soon, there will be strengthened soul desertions from Georgia and Florida. They will be found troublesome to reduce them. And it was troublesome. In a letter to Georgia Governor Mitchell of August 21st, 1812, Smith declared the blacks assisted by the Indians had become very daring. In September, further slave escapes were reported from Georgia. On September 11, a baggage train under Captain Williams and 20 men going to support Colonel Smith was attacked and routed. William himself killed by Indians and Maroons. In January 1813, further escapes were reported, and on February, Smith wrote that the battle with the Negroes and Indians and the destruction of the Negro fort. One Georgia participant in this fighting, Colonel Daniel Newman, had declared the Maroon allies of the Indians were their best soldiers. The refusal of the Senate of the United States at the moment and the sanctity occupation of East Florida finally led to a lull in the fighting. By 1816, however, annoyance and dangers from runaway slaves served as a justification for American intervention. With Southern complaints ringing in the ears, the administration dispatched in July United States troops with Indian allies under Colonel Duncan Clinch against the main stronghold of Maroons, the well-stocked Negro fort in Appalachian Apalachicola Bay. After the siege for about 10 days, a lucky cannon shot totally destroyed the fort, annihilating 270 men, women, and children, but 40 souls survived. After another major expedition against the Maroon Community was carried out in 1816, this occurred by Asheville, South Carolina. Governor David Williams remarks concerning this in his message of December 6, 1816, merit the quotation. A very few runaway slaves concealed themselves in the swamps and marshes contagious to the Combahee and Asheville rivers. Not having been interrupted in their petty plunderings for a long time, forming a nucleus around their ill-disposed and audacious near the gatherings, until the length of the robberies became too serious to be suffered with impunity. Attempts were made then to disperse them, but neither insufficient numbers or bad arrangements served them by the failure of only to encourage wanton destruction of property. Their forces become alarming and not less the number from arms and ammunition which they were supplied. The particular situation of the whole of that portion of our coast rendered access to them difficulty, while numerous creeks and watercourses through the marshes around the islands furnished them easy opportunities to plunder, not only planters in open day, but inland coastal trading, also leaving without a trace, their movements which they could be pursued. Therefore, I ordered Major General Youngblood to take the necessary measures in repressing them and authorize him to incur any necessary expense in the expedition. This was immediately executed by judicious appointment of the militia under his command. He either captured or destroyed the whole body. The Norfolk Herald, in June 29, 1818, referred to the serious damage occasioned by a group of some 30 runaway slaves acting together with white men in Prince Anne County, Virginia. It's reported, too, that the recent capture of a leader and an old woman member of the outlaws. In November that year, the Maroon activities in Wake County, North Carolina, became serious enough to invoke from the local press, which advised the patrol to keep a strict lookout. Later, an attack upon a store built by Maroon confetti of bandits of Negroes led to note that Andy, alias Billy James, better known by the name Abellino, was repulsed by armed citizens. The paper believed that the death of at least one white man, if not more, might be accurately placed at their hands. The Raleigh Register of December 18, 1818 printed Governor Blanche's proclamation offering $250 award for the capture of 7 pacified outlaws and $100 for Billy James alone. There is evidence that in the same year, Maroons active in Johnson County in that state and one expedition against them resulted in the killing of at least one Negro. Expeditions of Maroons took place in Williamsburg County, South Carolina. And in summer 1819, 3 slaves were killed, several captured, and 1 white wounded. Several activities occurred in May 1820 in Gates County, North Carolina. A slave outlaw, Harry, who head was assessed at $200, was killed by 4 armed white men. It is expected the balance of Harry's company, which had at least killed 1 white man, will soon be taken. 12 months later, there was a similar difficulty near Georgetown, South Carolina, resulting in the death of 1 slaveholder and the capture of 3 outlaws. The activity of considerable Maroon groups in Onslow, Carteret, and Baden counties, North Carolina, aided by some free Negroes, assumed a proportion of rebellion in the summer of 1821. There were plans for joint action against these outlaws and the field slaves against the slaveholders. Approximately 300 members of the militia in 3 counties saw service for about 25 days in August and September. About 12 of these men were wounded when 2 companies of the militia accidentally fired upon each other. The situation was under control by mid-September, although the said militia did not succeed in apprehending the runaways and fugitives. They did good by arresting some and driving others off and suppressing the spirit of insurrection. The newspaper item in 1824 disclosed that the prime mover of the trouble mentioned above, Isom, alias General Jackson, was among those who escaped at the time. He is reportedly has dying from the lashes publicly inflicted at Cape Fear, North Carolina. In the summer of 1822, activities among armed runaway slaves were reported in Jacksonboro, South Carolina. 3 was executed in July 19th. In August, Governor Burnett offered a reward for $200 for the capture of 20 Maroons in the same region. It is possible these Negroes have been enlisted in the far-flung conspiracy of Denmark Vesey, uncovered and crushed in June 1822. The Norfolk Herald of May 12, 1823 contains an unusual full account of Maroons under the heading, A Serious Subject. It declares that the citizens of the southern part of Norfolk County, Virginia, have for some time been kept in a state of mind particularly harassing and painful from the too apparent fact that their lives are at the mercy of a band of lurking assassins against whom their designs either the power of law or vigilance or personal strength and integrity can avail. These desperados are runaway Negroes, commonly called outliers. Their first objective is to obtain gun and ammunition, as well as pursue gain for subsistence, as to defend themselves from attack or accomplish objects of vengeance. Several men had already been killed by these former slaves. One, a Mr. William Walker, very recently. This aroused great fear. No individual after this can consider his life safe from the murdering aim of these monsters in human shape. Everyone who aptly rendered himself obnoxious to their vengeance must indeed be calculated to sooner or later falling a victim to them. Indeed, one slave holder received a note from these amazing fellows suggesting it would be helpful for him to remain indoors at night, and he did. A large body of militia was ordered to exterminate these outcasts and thus relieve the neighboring inhabitants from the state of perpetual anxiety and apprehension, that which nothing can be more painful. During the next few weeks, there was occasional reports of the killing and capturing of outlaws, accumulating on June 25th and the capture the leader himself, Bob Freeby, who it was declared had been an outlaw for 6 years. He was executed on July 25th. In October of that year, a runaway Negro near Pineville, South Carolina, was attacked. Several was captured, and at least 2, a woman and a child, was killed. One of the Maroons were decapitated, and his head was stuck on a pole, publicly exposed as a warning to vicious slaves. The Maroon community, consisting of men, women, and children, was broken up by a 3-day attack made by armed slaveholders of Mobile County, Alabama, in June 1827. The Negroes had been outlaws for years and lived entirely on plundering neighboring plantations. At the time of the attacks, the Negroes were constructing a stockade fort. Had them been finished, it is believed that the field of slaves thus informed would have joined them. Cannons would have been necessary for their destruction. The Maroons had made desperate resistance, fighting like Spartans. 3 were killed, others were wounded, and several escaped. Because of the poor arms of the Negroes, but one white man was slightly wounded. In November 1827, a Negro woman returned to her master in New Orleans after an absentee of 16 years. She told of a Maroon settlement some 8 miles north of the city containing 60 people. A dry prevailed at the moment, so it was felt that uncomfortable dryness had made most of those retreats unattainable. And we are told that about another camp at the head of the bayou, Veneboom. The policy perilously called upon through the search a destruction of most of such repairs where they found to exist. In the summer of 1829, a large gang of runaway Negroes have infested the parish of St. Christ Church in St. James, South Carolina, for several months, and committed serious depredation of the properties of the planter, was accidentally discovered by a party of deer hunters. One of the Negroes was wounded and 4 others captured. Several others escaped, but Charleston Mercury hoped that the citizens would not ease their aspiration until the evil should have been finally efficiently removed. Maroons were important factors in causing the slave insubordination in Sampson, Baden, Onslow, Jones, and New Hanover and Dublin counties, North Carolina, from September to December 1830. Citizens complained that their slaves had become almost uncontrollable. They go and come when they please, and if an attempt is made to correct them, they immediately fly to the woods and continue there for months and years, committing grievous predation on our cattle, hogs, and sheep. One of these fugitive slaves, Moses, who had been out for 2 years, was captured in November, and from him he elicited the information of an uprising was imminent and that the conspirators had arms and ammunition secreted, and they had runners and messengers to go between Williamton, New Bern, and Elizabeth City to carry the word and report to them. There was a camp in the Dover Swamp about 30-40, and another in the Gaston Islands, and on Price Creek, and several on Newport River, and several near Wilmington. Arms were found and placed at Moses' name, in the possession of a white woman living in a retired situation. Also some meat hid away and could be accounted for a child whom a party of citizens found a little way from the house, and said that his mammy dressed vigils every day for 4 or 5 runaways, and showed the spot where the meat was hidden, and where they found in a place of camp in Dover was found. A party of neighbors discovered the camp and burned 11 houses and made such discoveries as to convince them it was a place of rendezvous for numbers. It was supposed that they killed several Negroes. The newspaper account refers to the wholesale shooting of fugitives. In 1830, the Raccoon Advertiser suggested that the inhabitants of New Bern being advised of the assembly of 60 armed slaves in the swamp in their vicinity. The military was counted out and surrounding the swamp, killing the whole party. A later item dated Wilmington, January 7, 1831, declared there had been much shooting of the Negroes in this neighborhood recently, and a consequence of the symptoms of liberty having been discovered among them. It is an interesting note that the Richmond papers, in receiving the first reports of Nat Turner revolt in August 1831, asked concerning the rebels, were they connected with the desperados who had harnessed the North Carolina last year? In June 1836, it is mentioned that a band of runaway Negroes in a cypress swamp near New Orleans had been committing to depredations. The next year in July was reported the killing of an outlaw slave leader, Squire, near New Orleans, whose band, it was felt, was responsible for the death of several white men. Squire's career lasted 3 years. A guard of soldiers was sent to the camp for his body, in which they exhibited several days in the public square of the city. In the year of 1837, it also saw the start of the Florida or Seminole War, was destined to drag until 1843. This war, conducted largely as a slave-catching enterprise for the benefit of citizens of Georgia and Florida, was before its determination to take an unknown number of Indian and Negro lives together with the lives of 1,500 white soldiers and an expedition of $20 million. The Indians had at the beginning of the hostilities 1,650 warriors and 250 Negro fighters. The latter was the most formidable foe and a more bloodthirsty, active, and vengeful than the Indians. The armed runaways repulsed an attack near Wilmington, North Carolina in January 1841 after killing one of the whites. The posse captured 3 of the Negroes and lodged them in the city jail. One escaped, but 2 were taken from the prison by some 25 whites and lynched. Later, in September, 2 companies of militia were dispatched to search for a body of Maroons some 45 miles north of Mobile, Alabama. It was believed that these fellows had been for a long time in the practice of theft and arson in the town and in the country. The force from above was scouring down with bloodhounds and company to meet the Mobile party. 1 month later, frequent attacks upon a white man by runaway Negroes were reported in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. Several armed planters near Halesville, Mississippi, in February 1844, set an ambush for Maroons who had been exceedingly troublesome. 6 Negroes, part of the gang, were trapped, but 3 escaped. 2 of the wounded and 1 was killed. In November 1846, about a dozen armed slaveholders surprised a considerable amount of runaway Negroes in St. Laundry Parish, Louisiana. The Maroons refused to surrender. 2 Negroes, a man and a woman, was killed, and 2 Negro women was badly wounded. The other escapes. Joshua R. Reed Glidden refers to the flight in September of 1850 of some 300 former Florida Maroons from their abode in the present Oklahoma to Mexico. This was accomplished after driving off Creek Indians sent to expose their exodus. The Pennsylvania Freeman of October 30th, 1851, citing the Houston Telegraph, stated that 1,500 former American slaves were aiding the Comanche Indians in Mexico in their fighting. 500 of these Negroes from Texas. Giddings referred to the unsuccessful expeditions by the slaveholders of Texas in 1853 into Mexico to recover the Negroes, and declared that at the time that he was writing, in 1858, Maroons in southern Florida were again causing trouble. F.L. Olmsted gave evidence of Maroon troubles in the 1850s in Virginia, Louisiana, and northern Alabama. A letter, August 25, 1856, to the Governor Thomas Bragg of North Carolina, signed by Richard A. Lewis and 25 other citizens, informed him of a very secure retreat for runaway Negroes in a large swamp between Bergen and Robeson County. There are many paths, and there have been, at this time, there were several runaways of bad and daring character, and there's all kinds of destructive stock, and dangers to all persons living near or said swamp. The slaveholder attacked these Negroes August 1st, 1856, but accomplished nothing and saw no one of their own number get killed. The Negroes ran off cursing and swearing, telling them to come on, and they was ready for them again. The Wilmington Journal of August 14th mentioned that these runaways had cleared this place for a garden, had cows, and in the swamp. Mr. Lewis and his friends were unable to offer sufficient inducement for Negro hunters to come with their dogs unless aided by some other sources. The governor suggested the magistrate be requested for all to call of the militia, but whenever this was done or not, it was not unknown. The runaway camp was destroyed. 4 Negroes, including a woman, captured near Bonneville, Mississippi in March 1857. A similar event resulting in the wounding of 3 Maroons occurred in October 1859 in Nash County, North Carolina. A camp of organized white men and Negroes was held responsible for the Servitor conspiracy involving whites, which was uncovered in Talladega County, Alabama in August 1860. The years of the Civil War witnessed a considerable action in the struggle of Negro people against enslavement. This is true of the Maroon activity as it generally was. There were reports of depredations committed by a gang of runaway slaves acting together with 2 whites along the Comanche River, Louisiana, in early 1861. The expedition set a foot to capture the whole party. The community near Marion, South Carolina was attacked in June. A runaway community near Marion, South Carolina was attacked in June 1861. There was no casualties, however. The slave hunters captured only 2 Negro children, 12 guns, and 1 axe. Confederate Brigadier General F.R. Floyd asked Governor Milton of Florida on April 11, 1862, to declare martial law in Nassau, Duval, and Clay and Putman and St. Johns and Valencia counties as a matter of absolute necessity as they contained a nest of Negro of traitors and lawless Negroes. In October 1862, a scouting party of 3 armed whites investigating a Maroon camp containing 100 men and women and children in Surrey County, Virginia, were killed by these fugitives. Governor Sorter of Alabama, J.H. Clayton, in January 1863 to destroy a nest of the southeastern part of the state of deserters, traitors, and runaway Negroes. Colonel Hatch of the Union Army reported in August 1864 that the 500 Union men, deserters, and Negroes were raiding towards Gainesville, Florida. The same month, a Confederate officer, John K. Jackson, declared that many deserters are collected in swamps with factions of Taylor, Lafayette, Levy, and other counties in Florida, and have organized with runaway Negro bands for the purpose of committing depredations upon plantations and crops of loyal citizens and running off their slaves. These depredation bands have even threatened the cities of Talladega, Madison, and Mariana. A Confederate newspaper noticed with similar activities in North Carolina in 1864. It reported difficult to find a description of the wild and terrible consequences of the Negro raids of this obscure theater of war. The 2 counties, Carteret and Camden, there are said to be 500 to 600 Negroes who are not in a regular military organization in Yankee, but who outlawed and disown their masters, lead the life of banditry, roving the countryside with fires and committing horrible crimes upon the inhabitants. This present theater, guerrilla war, has at this time a most important interest for our authorities. It is described as a rich country and one of the most important sources of meat supplies that is now accessible to our army. The account ends with a broad hint that white deserters from the Confederate Army were fighting shoulder to shoulder with self-emancipated Negroes. The story of the American Maroons is of interest not only because it's fairly important for the part of history of the South and of the Negro, but because of the evidence it affords to show that the conventional picture of slavery was more or less the delightful patriotic system of a fallacies. The coronary of this fallacious picture, docile, content slaves, is also seriously questioned. Indeed, taking the material on Maroons in conjunction with the recent president of the Savile revolts, one leads one to assert that American slavery was a horrid form of tyrannical rule, which often found it necessary to suppress ruthlessly and desperation of the victims' content on the party of its outraged victims. And there you have it. That's Maroons Within the Present Limits of the United States by Hebert Aptheker, the Journal of Negro History, Volume 24, Number 2, in April 1939. So when you see these so-called people, black people coming in, Indians and Aboriginals, bring this article up. I'm going to put the article in there and his works and stuff like that. That's not true. You know what I'm saying? They were black people that were just, who didn't accept slavery. Slavery was a choice. I know a lot of people get mad at me when I say that, but when you read articles like this and history like this, it's many pages of history like this, unknown to us. You know, you can just stay and deal with that. You can come out in these woods and survive and live and, live off the land. Like I said, they had their own villages. In Elizabeth City, North Carolina, there's a black college out there. You know what I'm saying? So let's not, dick the dog on this. These people was fighting and banging. So when you see people claiming black people claiming Aboriginals, and also talk about the Nat Turner story, you know what I'm saying, how that stuff was connected. There was black people living on a periphery called outliers, Maroons, and stuff like that, and they never gave up their freedom or their African heritage until now today. A lot of cats just got lost their way on that stuff like that. But this is scholarship. I can prove a lot more than this. You know what I'm saying? To show that. So, much love to our ancestors, the ones that fought and didn't accept slavery as a choice, that took guns and went, and they did what they had to do. They robbed and stole off the land. They lived off the land, built their own stuff, and made stuff happen. They wasn't going to be slaves to this beast of a white man. You know what I'm saying? Hey, much love. Subscribe to the channel. We're going to have a couple more videos like this. And, hey, subscribe to the channel. Peace.